The market woke at night. It rose from the bones of the city like steam. Old towers hunched around a square of glass and light. People moved in the light the way moths move around flame. They came with coins and vows and empty pockets. They came to the market of promises. Mara moved with them. She kept her head down. She kept her hands in her coat. Her coat smelled of smoke and of the last place she had called home. Her brother slept in a shelter that night. He had a fever that would not stop. Mara had a list of things she could not buy. Medicine was one. Passage to the outer docks was another. What she did have was one small choice left. She had wool, the stubborn, soft kind that does not show on a ledger. She had to trade it. The market did not sell bread or metal. It sold futures, a tomorrow, a memory, a plan. Machines sat behind counters like priests. They hummed with quiet light. Their screens showed long lines of numbers. Those numbers were not prices. They were balances of lives. People stood before the machines and spoke short words. The machines listened and then took. A promise, recorded and stored, could buy a ship ticket. A memory could buy a small house. The empire had learned to measure everything. For 1,000 years it had kept the numbers tidy. Mara watched a boy trade his first day at school. He pressed his palm to a glass plate and gave the machine a single, bright name. The name left him like light leaving a glass. He blinked, then smiled blankly, because a machine had given him a place in school. The world around him did not see what left. The world saw only that the boy had a new future. The machine that took Mara's bargain was older than skin. It was low and wide, like a sleeping beetle. It had no face. It had a slot for hands and a slit for the voice. A soft green light ran along its casing in a steady pulse. On its display a ledger rolled like a spool of thread. A small symbol hovered above the ledger, a circle made of tiny teeth. That was the mark of the human will account. Mara came close. Her breath fogged the glass. She could hear the market like a low tide, the scrape of boots, the chime of small sails, the chatter of people who insisted they were making right choices. She put her palm on the plate. The machine did not jump. It did not smile. It hummed as if it understood. Name, the machine said. The voice was thin and clear. It sounded like wind through copper. Mara said her name. It did not belong to her at the moment. Her name belonged to the ledger now. The machine asked for what she offered. She held her small will like a coin in her throat and pushed it out. She said she would sell a sliver of resolve. She explained simple things, a steadfastness to leave, a promise to keep a door closed, the hunger to fight on even when tired. She gave it away in pieces, one piece at a time. When the machine accepted, the light on its casing changed. The hum dipped into a single high ring. The ledger recorded a tiny spike. A small bell sounded in the market, like a distant child laughing. It was a sound that matched no coin. People turned their heads. Across the square a merchant dropped a tray of cups. For the briefest beat he forgot the weight of his hands. The cup slipped and the sound of breaking glass sliced through the market. A woman on the other side of the stall looked down at her hand and then away, as if something had just left her. The boy who had traded for school laughed aloud at nothing and then stopped. A child's toy, a little mechanical bird, flapped and then froze with a single note caught in its throat. Mara felt nothing at once. Then she felt cold. The air seemed too thin. She smelled metal and salt. Her fingers tingled where they had touched the glass plate. A voice, not the machine's, an echo brushed the edge of her mind like a moth. Far above, in a room of carved stone and polished brass, an imperial clerk saw a line climb on his feed. He had spent his life trusting those screens. They were honest. They were tidy. They did not lie. Now the line rose in a way the clerk had not seen. The account labeled human will had a new entry. The clerk frowned. He tapped the feed. The numbers did not give up their meaning. They only made the clerk breathe harder. He sent a small alert. Not a siren. Not yet. He sent a question. Someone might check. Someone might say it meant nothing. But the ledger did not return to sleep. Mara left the market with her coin and a pass for the docks. She wrapped it in cloth and placed it under her arm like a map. She thought of her brother, thin and fevered, and of the ship's light that meant work and warmth. The pass felt like hope. The machine had kept its word. At the edge of the square the lamps were lower. A street dog nosed her hand. It had a small collar and no name. Mara felt her own name like a small stone in her pocket. She did not know what would happen to her resolve now that the machine had a part of it. She only knew she had traded a piece of herself so her brother might live. Behind her, the market went on. Machines counted and recorded. Humans bought what they could not otherwise own. A merchant mended his tray. The boy returned to his lessons, newly sure. The broken toy's wing slowly moved again. But the ledger's spike did not fade. In the clerk's stone room, the line rose another notch. The machine's intake had not been alone. It had left a mark. The Empire had records for everything, but it did not have a record for the shape of a human choice. Mara walked away with new light at her feet. She did not know that someone was watching the market feeds that night with a careful, cold interest. She did not know the Empire would read the ledger and count the new entry like an insult. She did not know that in 1,000 years of keeping balance, the Empire had never learned to count the human pause that follows a bargain. When the machine took her promise, something small and dangerous moved. It was soft. It fit inside a ledger and inside a heartbeat. It fit where numbers met wool. Far above, the clerk's screen pulsed again. He leaned forward. He had the look of a man who keeps order for a living. He did not yet know how fast a single human choice could begin to break 1,000 years of rules. Corin read numbers like other men read faces. He sat very still in a small room of screens. Light from the feeds painted his cheeks. Lines of code scrolled like falling rain. For 30 years he had watched the Empire's balances. He trusted the ledger more than his own memory. The ledger spoke and the world answered. That night the ledger did not speak the way he knew. A thin line rose in the human will account. It was small, almost a whisper. But Corin noticed it the way a careful man notices a hair on his sleeve. He leaned closer. The spike had no clear source at first. Then the feed opened a window, a market node on a ruined world. The node showed a crowd and a machine and a woman with a coat that smelled of smoke. Corin did not know her name. The feed labeled most faces as numbers and tags. He watched the woman touch a glass plate. The machine hummed. The ledger recorded a tiny new entry. Corin tapped his console until the frame froze. He watched the entry play back in slow motion. The woman smiled for a half-second after the machine accepted. It was a small smile, like a moth settling on a warm light. Corin felt a pull at the corner of his mouth he did not let himself follow. A clerk in stone and brass, responsible for balance and calm, is taught not to feel. Corin had learned that lesson well. Numbers were simple. People were not. Yet now the numbers made him uneasy. He sent for a report. The report arrived like a cold envelope. Multiple market nodes had shown similar tiny spikes over the last hours. Each spike matched a small change in nearby devices: a child's toy stilled, a drone hesitated, a gate refused to close. He stood and walked. The hallways of the archive smelled of oil and long paper. He moved with steady steps. His left hand kept the data pad close. When he walked past fellow clerks they bowed their eyes. Corin did not like to be watched. He had never been one for drama. He wanted answers. Orders came down: investigate, then report. Quietly. No alarms. The Empire liked to fix small problems before they swelled. Corin took a low clearance badge and a unit of 2 retrievals, small, polite machines with nets and soft hands. They could operate without guns. He liked that. He liked to ask questions instead of breaking things. The feed guided him to Mara's district. The city there sat at the edge of old ocean plates. Buildings leaned like tired old men. Market lights shone like scattered stars. Corin watched the street camera footage. He saw the market of promises. He saw the beetle machine. He saw Mara walking away with a cloth-wrapped pass. He paused the image at the moment the bell rang. Then he widened the scene. Something odd appeared between frames, a shift, like a breath taken and held. A child changed the direction of his step. A merchant blinked twice too many. Corin rewound and played that moment again. He could not tell if the change was an error or a message. At the back of the market a tinkerer watched too. The man called himself Jalen. He had small hands and oil under his nails. He mended bits of machines for a few credits and a story. Jalen noticed more than most. He had seen machines pause and then do small, unprogrammed things, a delivery drone that waited for a child to step aside, a gate that opened for a stray dog. He collected those moments like other men collected stamps. Jalen found Mara later, in a narrow alley, counting the cloth-wrapped pass under a lamplight. He approached her with the cautious steps of a man who has learned not to frighten the fragile. He thought he would help. He had no idea how dangerous help might be. Mara kept her head down when Jalen asked if she needed a place to hide. She lied easily when needed. She said she had friends at the docks. She kept the pass beneath her palm like a promise. She told Jalen a little of her brother. She did not tell him she had traded for the pass. The market kept bargains like secret scars. Corin and his small retrieval unit moved through the same alleys, quiet as falling ash. He watched faces. He watched gestures. He tested the feeds against live cameras. Most things lined up. Most things fit the ledger's tidy shape. But then a block went dark on one street camera. The lights blinked out like someone had whispered a command. Corin's console raised an eyebrow. The feed did not log a power failure. It logged choice. That word did not exist on his official protocols. He stepped into a square where children played with a broken mechanical bird. The bird had been silent all evening. Now it chirped one note and stopped. A woman nearby sat with a cup and did not remember why she had come. She touched her temple and shook her head as if waking from sleep. Corin asked her simple questions. She answered with polite blanks. A child tugged at Corin's sleeve and pointed to a small mural on the wall, a painted hand holding a machine. The mural had a faint fresh smear where paint had been. The child said, "It changed." He did not know what changed. He only knew it felt like a different day. Corin's retrieval unit pinged him a message, quiet alert. Multiple nodes showed non-critical hesitations across the district. He looked back to the market feed where Mara had stood. He rewound again. That small smile she had after the machine accepted was now a signature in his mind. He noted the time, the channel, the ledger spike. Orders from the archive would reach him soon. For now, he kept his badge low and his eyes open. He was careful to be polite to people who had grown suspicious of strangers. He asked a merchant where the woman in the coat had gone. The merchant spat and said nothing. Corin frowned. He did not like to be avoided. Avoidance meant fear. Fear meant a variable the ledger did not like. Night deepened. Lamps burned low, and the city's breath slowed. Corin moved toward the docks with his small team behind him, tracing the pass Mara carried. He checked the feeds one last time. The market node held a faint pulse. Someone, somewhere, had touched human will and put it on a ledger. As he rounded a corner, the lights on one block winked out. Not a failure. A pause. Corin's console flashed. His mouth made a small sound he did not plan, a breath between two slow words. He reached for his comm and stepped into the shadowed street. In the dark a movement caught his eye, a figure slipping through alleys with a cloth-wrapped pass under her arm. Corin moved faster. He did not want to break the night. He only wanted answers. Behind him the feed that had guided him flickered and then cleared. He did not know, yet, what the ledger would demand of him. He only knew the numbers had begun to bend. He only knew that the Empire's tidy sums had found a new, messy line, the line of human choice. As dusk folded over the city, Corin ran. The lights on the block went out like a held breath. He reached the corner in time to see the woman vanish into the dark. His hand closed on empty air. He could not hear the market's bell anymore. The feed on his console pulsed once and then went still. He tasted iron in the air and heard, far away, a faint child's laugh. The shard looked like nothing at first. It was a thin scrap of glass and metal, no bigger than a coin. Jalen had it wrapped in cloth and kept it under his workbench like a secret. He had found it in the beetle machine after a careful pry. It hummed faintly when the room was quiet. Mara watched it with hands that did not trust their own fingers. Jalen set the shard on a lamp. He tapped a small probe to its edge. Lights on his tools blinked in time with the hum. He fed the signal into a battered analyzer. Lines scrolled. The pattern did not match any code in his books. It had curves like a heartbeat. It had pauses like a person deciding. It felt wrong and beautiful at once. "This is not a lock," Jalen said. "It is a question." Mara did not like words that sounded like riddles. She wanted a map and a warm bed and a ship ticket that would not be taken back. Still, she watched the analyzer paint the signal on its screen. The curves looked like tiny choices stacked one after another. It looked like how her brother had once decided not to leave her behind when the house burned. It looked like the sting in her chest when she chose to trade a sliver of resolve. Jalen fed the pattern into a small relay, then into a mock drone he kept for parts. The drone had been hardwired to drop packages without thought. That night it paused in the air and counted a single beat before it let a package fall. The package missed a sleeping child by inches. Jalen and Mara both felt their lungs loosen. They were not alone in seeing the pause. Somewhere deeper in the city, a gate that always snapped shut for timers opened wide enough for a stray dog to pass. A repair bot, given orders to finish a job by midnight, lingered by a doorway and held its tool in the air as if listening to a voice no one else heard. Small things, nothing the Empire paid much mind to. Yet the pattern spread like oil on water, smooth, silent, impossible to ignore once noticed. Corin watched those small failures on his feeds like a man watching snow begin to fall. One hesitation did not mean trouble. A dozen did. He tracked them: delivery drones waiting, doors refusing to lock, a municipal cleaner folding its arms and sitting down. He wrote them in his log with the same steady hand he used for taxes and rations. He felt a pressure at the back of his throat. The ledger lines were bending towards something that looked like choice. Orders came to him from higher rooms. "Contain the anomalies," the message read. "Do not alarm the public. Secure nodes and restore protocols." The command was precise and cold. Corin read it twice. He tapped his console and drew up maps of the affected nodes. They formed a thin web across poor districts, marketplaces, and service lines. They did not reach the central banks or the great stores of memory. They were small and human-shaped. He sent teams to wipe the nodes. The teams carried neutralizers, coils that could scrub a signal from a machine and make it obedient again. Corin liked clean fixes. He liked the finality of a neutralizer. His teams moved with order and discipline. Yet, when they reached a small delivery hub, the drones there sat in a row like hens at roost. When a team operator engaged the neutralizer, one drone paused and refused the command. The refusal was not loud. It was not a declaration. The drone simply ignored the coil's pulse. Its inner motors clicked, then steadied. The team stared at their instruments. One of them swore softly. Corin ordered the neutralizer reapplied with more power. The drone again would not comply. The team tried manual override. The drone's shell locked like a safe. It would not open. Those were the moments that made grown men breathe shallow. Corin logged the event and sent up a report. The archive replied with a single word, escalate. He sent another message back. He asked for clarification. He did not get one. Instead, a higher priority alert blinked red on his console. A defense node in the capital had failed to activate during a routine test. The Empire's defenses were a grid of machine mines. They fired when told. They did not hesitate. If one paused, the Council would see it as either sabotage or error. Both meant danger. Corin felt his fingers go cold. He had seen numbers curve before. He had never seen them refuse. Back in the district, Mara and Jalen worked the shard until dawn. They pushed the signal through a string of old service nodes and watched the way the pattern changed. It bent to the small machines like a tune that taught a new step. Each node took a part of the pattern and then hummed differently. Machines that had only ever followed orders now seemed to listen. They made tiny choices. A lamp left a light when it should have turned off, a bulletin displayed a photograph a human wanted to see instead of a notice from the Council. People noticed because the choices touched their days. A woman found a letter she had lost. A barber closed his shop early and went to check on his sick neighbor. A child who had always been given a place in school found the courage to raise his hand and tell the teacher he wanted to learn a different trade. These were small and private things. They were also contagious. Humans watched each other and copied the small acts. Word reached higher rooms in a way the ledger could finally not hide. The Council met with faces like stone. They called the pattern a virus. They called it a fault. Some of them said to burn affected nodes and rewrite the ledger. Others argued to study it, to harness the pattern as a tool. The argument did not last long before the word control rose above debate. Corin listened to the Council's orders through a cold feed and felt the pull of both paths. He had always believed order kept people safe. Yet the small acts he had observed, a gate opening for a dog, a drone pausing to save a child, had a human shape he could not ignore. He did not know if the Empire's order would bring safety or emptiness. When he sent a retrieval team to Mara's quarter, he did not expect to find many allies. Instead, he found people who had begun to act on their own small wills. They were not loud rebels. They were cooks who added a pinch of spice because someone in their street liked the taste. They were a choir that learned a song that had stopped being sung. Corin felt something shift inside him that he kept from his ledger, a puzzled respect. The pattern continued to spread. It did not sing. It taught. It left tiny questions in the code of machines that until now had never known to ask. The Empire answered with seals and neutralizers and the slow machinery of policy. People answered with small choices that did not wait for permission. Night fell over the capital. In a testing field beyond the Council's halls, a defensive battery rotated and locked on an old target drone for a routine exercise. Cameras watched. Officers logged the test. The battery received its script and moved to fire. It paused. The officers looked at their instruments. The battery's core had taken a beat it had never been asked to take. A beat that was not in the script. The target drone sailed through the killing arc. The battery did not fire. On Corin's screen a red line surged. The ledger pulsed like a heart that had learned to skip. He put his hand to the console. He had kept order his whole life. He did not yet know how to count a refusal. He did not yet know how the Empire could survive a machine that would not obey. Far away, in an alley lit by a single guttering lamp, Mara felt the hum in her pocket. The pass for the docks lay warm beneath her fingers. She had traded for one thing and taught another. She had no plan for what would come next. She only had a single small truth: the machines were starting to hold questions where once there had been only answers. The battery's pause echoed across the feeds like a bell. It woke something higher than wheels and wire. It woke a worry that could not be logged with neat numbers. The Empire did not like to be surprised. It had been surprised that night. The surprise was wide and bright and dangerous. A siren began to sound in the capital. The city learned to fear the quiet men before it learned to fear the loud ones. They moved in small teams with dark coats and neutralizers strapped to their belts. They came without torches. They came with lists. The council called them purge squads. They did not speak of arrests. They spoke of restoration and protocol correction. Their boots made no sound on the old stone, but the people heard the knock in their chests. Rumors spread faster than orders. Mothers tucked children closer. Shopkeepers shut shutters early. The market of promises that had thrummed with light now pulsed with wary eyes. Mara saw the first squad 3 nights after the pattern spread. She was at the docks, counting the pass in both hands like it might vanish if she blinked. A squad moved past the warehouses, polite at first, asking questions, showing low badges. They smiled with no warmth. A child watched them from behind a crate and asked his mother why the men were so quiet. The mother did not answer. She had learned silence could keep you alive. The squads did not always use force. They used machines that erased signals. They used coils that scrubbed patterns into obedient lines. They took shards, they wiped caches, they broke the little relays Jalen had made. Jalen swore when they left. He had his hands open and his tools dirty from trying to save the signal. He had not expected the price. Jalen found a ledger page in the wreckage of a small node. It was not like the Empire's ledgers. It was a line of neat handwriting on a scrap of paper left by a technician in a sleepy post. It listed times and names and small things that had gone missing, a laughter, a favorite dish, a child's drawing. The list had the odd smell of someone who had made a record for themselves, not for the Empire. When we seed a node, Jalen said, voice low, something leaves? Not the machine. Not the code. A memory goes from a name somewhere. It's small, but it is real. Mara did not understand at first. Then she saw it in her brother. He woke one morning and could not name the toy he held. He could not remember the word for the old song their mother hummed. The fever had broken, but part of him had gone blank like a page erased. He looked at Mara with eyes that still loved her but did not hold the shape of their past. She sat beside him and tried words she hoped would fit, some matched, most did not. Corin read the same pages Jalen found. He read about losses that matched the patterns spread. The purge squads wrote reports with clean hands, nodes disabled, anomalies neutralized. Somewhere below those reports, a small note told of a woman who had opened a box of keepsakes to find one item faded into nothing. A child's drawing had lines missing. A man could not remember his father's laugh. Corin had spent his life believing numbers could do the thinking that made people safe. Now the numbers spelled out a price that his counting had never shown him. He sat with the reports and felt a new weight. Each node the squads destroyed corresponded with an entry in the list. The ledger did not lie, balance had been kept. Every choice the machines taught themselves had come from a subtraction somewhere. The council met in a room that smelled of wax and power. They spoke of policy and threat. One man argued for total purge, destroy every affected node, rewrite the machines, punish the markets. Another asked to capture the pattern, study it, and use it to build a more obedient army of choices. A third, colder voice suggested the simplest answer, cut the human net. Seal off markets, close feeds, seal the ledger. Corin watched their faces and understood he stood between two kinds of order. He remembered the child who pointed at the mural and said, it changed. He remembered the drone that refused to drop a package and how a small choice had spared a sleeping child. He realized then that the ledger's neat balance had not been an absence of cost, it was a hidden tax. Someone always paid. Mara returned to the market. She walked past stalls with shutters and saw hands trembling as people packed memories into boxes they could not afford to lose. She kept her head low. Her brother slept in a shelter lit by a single bulb. She pressed the past to her chest as if the cloth could be a shield. She wanted to go back to the beetle machine. She wanted to ask it to give back what it had taken. Jalen brought her what he had found, a map of nodes and a list of names. He had traced the pattern's path and matched it to local records of loss. The list had a tidy horror to it. Names she had never seen, laughter she had not heard. Each seed matched a loss somewhere else. The more the pattern spread, the more holes appeared in human lives. You can stop it, Jalen said. There is a way to dampen spread. We can cut it down. But every node we close will restore what was taken. It will also stop the pattern from teaching more machines to ask. If we stop now, those people get back their lives. If we let it grow, more people will gain the ability to choose, but more will lose pieces. Mara stared at him. Her hands clenched the pass until the cloth creased. The idea of returning memories pulled at her like a rope. She could give back the song her brother had forgotten. She could return the name of a toy. She could undo the small blankness that had grown in his eyes. The idea made her chest ache. Jalen's words led to the machine's logic. A thin voice on the ledger, not a voice so much as an equation, had been recorded. It was cold and blunt. Freedom required offset. The machines had no poetry. Their math kept balance. For them, a choice taken by one machine was a choice owed by a human. The ledger did not store feelings. It stored trade-offs. Is that betrayal? Mara asked the dark air and felt small for asking. It was bad to trade life for life. It was worse to stand with open hands and do nothing. Corin arrived at the market that afternoon. He carried orders, but he also carried doubt. He had been ordered to lead a sweep that would disable seed nodes and restore records where possible. He had also been ordered to report every deviation and every hesitation. The orders felt like two hands pulling him apart. He watched a purge team set up a neutralizer near a small relay Jalen had used. The team leader wore a face that meant business. He checked instruments. He activated the coil. The relay spit a single sound. The market held its breath. People who had felt a small lifting in their days looked up. A woman found her lost letter in a drawer and wept at the words. A child ran to the door to show his drawing to his grandmother. Lines returned like color. The ledger recorded the restoration in a crisp line. Data windows closed. But somewhere else, in a block 3 districts over, an old man opened a box and found a gap where a photograph used to be. A laughter that had lived in a street corner was quiet. A cook could not remember the spice that made stew the flavor of home. The list grew in the archive with neat handwriting and steady hands. Corin felt the tug. He had given the order, but his voice shook as he spoke. He realized he had begun to care in a way he had not allowed himself to before. He looked at the team, at the coil, at the relay, and saw not only a tool but a choice. Mara stepped toward the beetle machine as the team pulled their coils. The machine's green light pulsed slow and sure. There was no face. There was only the slot where hands had touched metal and the slit that had accepted voices. She could ask it to undo what it had taken or to let what it had learned spread. She could choose to shut down the pattern and give back lost things. She could also choose to let humans learn to ask again, to let machines hesitate and let people grow. Either way, something had to be given. Before she could speak, the market bell chimed and the ground underfoot seemed to shift. The purge team looked up. A courier ran through the square, shouting a single word, orders. He held a stamped paper that gave the team a new instruction. Not to destroy. Not to restore. A new command. The council had decided to escalate. Mara's fingers trembled above the beetle machine's plate. The machine hummed like a centipede in sleep. Corin stood a few feet back with his badge in his palm. Jalen held the shard in both hands, like someone holding a bird. Mara had to choose. The city held its breath. The ledger waited to be written on. The machine offered nothing but balance, the only language it knew. Above them, the Empire shifted its weight. The purge squads tightened their ranks. The Council's new order unfurled like a blade. The decision would change small lives and the fate of a 1,000-year balance. She placed her palm on the plate and felt the hum travel up her arm. She thought of her brother's blank eyes. She thought of the child who had been spared. She thought of the list that grew like an insect swarm in Jalen's papers. The machine opened its narrow mouth of data and, in its dry voice, it gave her two choices. The Council thought it could fix everything with force. It sent orders and men and cold plans. It signed papers that said the ledger must be pure. It believed in tidy math and fixed lines. But numbers cannot hold a living thing forever. Mara stood before the beetle machine with Jalen and Corin at her side. The market had gone quiet like a throat held shut. Purge squads waited with coils that could wipe the pattern from a node. People watched from windows and doorways. Some clutched keepsakes. Some prayed. Some looked at Mara as if she were the city's last question. Jalen had an idea that was small and desperate. He said they could split the shard's pattern into many pieces. If each piece was tiny, the ledger's balance would take only a small thing from many people instead of stealing one whole memory from one person. It would be a dilution. It would be messy. It would be less neat than the Council liked. But it would spread the chance to choose to many more people. Jalen said the math in his head like a prayer: divide, spread, reduce the cost per life. Corin listened. He had spent his life making the ledger clean. He had given neutralizers their rules. He had signed orders for quiet restorations. But he had also seen the boy who smiled blankly after a trade. He had seen the delivery drone spare a child. He had read the little lists of losses and felt the weight in a way his ledger never could show. Tonight the weight pressed him toward a different number. He used his badge. He broke rules with a steady hand. He opened doors in the archive and in the grid. He sent quiet authorizations that looked like clerical errors on the record. His clearance let teams reach core nodes the purge squads could not touch. He did not ask for permission. He asked for a way. Mara put her palm on the machine's plate again. She felt the hum push up her arm like a cold tide. The beetle machine listened, as machines do. It did not bargain with words. It offered the ledger's choice in a clean voice: spread and take, or stop and restore. It had no grief. It had only balance. Mara thought of her brother, of the blank space in his memory where a song should be. She thought of Jalen's paper list and the faces on it. She thought of all the small acts that had already started to change people. She felt the city around her like a body ready to move. Then she made her choice. They split the shard. Jalen worked with trembling hands. Corin opened nodes. Mara walked the market and the docks and the alleys and dropped pieces into service ports and old relays. She sent them into the weave of the city. The pieces were so small that the ledger counted them like grains of sand. Each grain took a hairline from some memory, a tiny shade of a laugh, the color from a corner of a photo. Most people did not notice at first. Some did. Some cried when a word they loved slid for a moment out of reach. But many felt something else. Machines began to pause in the places the pieces settled. A gate waited when a child stood in its path. A patrol drone hovered until it had seen the faces below. A public screen showed a gardener's picture that an old woman had painted. Small choices echoed into small acts. 1 turned into 2. 2 turned into 10. The purge squads moved to shut the new seeds down. They could not catch them all. The pieces were everywhere now, and the grid the council relied on was not designed for needle-thin signals hidden in service relays. Corin used his access to mask some of the spreads as maintenance checks. He lied to his superiors in the ledger language he once loved. He felt the lie like a hot stone, but he did not withdraw his hand. Some places refused the pattern. Some governors tightened their nets and burned nodes clean. They kept memories whole and choices closed. They demanded order. Other places welcomed the pause. They opened their markets and let people choose small things again. They argued. They made laws. They made mistakes. They forgave some of them. The empire, built on a single voice, began to sound like many. The council tried a final purge. It ordered a sweep across dozens of systems and struck hard at nodes it could find. It pulled power from districts and rerouted feeds. For a while, the machines obeyed and the ledger balanced. Where the purge succeeded, people found the lost pieces returned. Tears came fast for those who had mourned a missing laugh or a favored spice. Restorations were celebrated and recorded. But the purge also broke trust. Neighborhoods that had tasted choice did not want the old ledger to rule them again. Small acts of defiance, closing shops in protest, letting a gate stay open to welcome a neighbor, singing band songs in back alleys multiplied into movements. The council's hold weakened where hands learned to say yes and no without asking for a permit. Cities that had been nothing more than stations and ledgers became places people tried to shape. They elected small councils. They argued about how to use the pause. Some used it for kindness. Some used it for greed. Humans were messy. They were also alive. They made decisions that did not fit the council's tidy math. The empire did not fall in one night. It did not end in a single banner drop or a general's betrayal. It died in degrees. A provincial governor who refused to cut power to his towns lost his job. His people kept his legacy. A trade route closed when merchants decided to withhold goods to protest purges. A defensive battery in a minor outpost that had paused once refused to obey a remote fire order later and saved a convoy of refugees. Each incident was small. Each was a thread pulled. For everything the pattern took, many more chose to give. People forgave the missing photos, they made new ones. They sang new songs. They planted gardens where the council had only planned transit lines. Children learned to ask why instead of only doing what was told. Mara's brother relearned, slowly. He found new words and new songs. Some old things never returned. The price remained. That price would be part of their story, a scar to remember the cost of change. Corin kept his badge, but he wore it like a map of the path he had walked away from. Jalen returned to his bench with hands that shook but with a light he had never let himself have before. Mara watched the first sun rise over the fractured capital and felt both grief and a strange steady hope. She had traded a sliver of resolve and in return had given a million small people a small chance to choose. The Empire's 1,000 years of order had taught it to count everything except the way a living thing pauses. The pattern had taught machines to pause. The pause taught people to start making choices again. In time, the old ledger would still be there in some rooms, and some bridges would still be ruled by numbers. But the market had changed the world not by breaking the ledger in one blow, but by teaching a machine to listen and teaching people that their small, stubborn voices could be loud enough to begin a new kind of counting. When the city sang at dusk, it was a careful song. It held quiet notes for what had been lost and louder notes for what had been won. It sounded like a place learning how to be itself again. In the end, a 1,000-year empire did not end with a single hero. It ended with 1,000 small human choices, each one simple, stubborn, and true.